Shenanigans back again, and welcome to part 2 of my top cards of Hearthstone series as of Blackrock Mountain. Today we are looking at the rares. One thing I'd like to say before we get started is that rares, I feel, are kind of the glue that holds Hearthstone decks together. I say that because you'll notice during this episode I'll talk a lot about synergy and how rares really are what make most of the decks cohesive. You'll see as we go. First off, let's start with our honorable mention, and that goes to the Grim Patron. Grim Patron, 5 mana, 3/3. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon another Grim Patron. This, along with maybe one or two other cards, has really influenced the constructed meta within the last, say, 2 months. So you're probably wondering, why is this card not on the top 10 list itself? Why is it only an honorable mention? And really that's because of its limited use, okay? When you look at this card, it has allowed Warrior a new deck archetype, the Grim Patron Warrior deck. However, it hasn't really opened things up for other classes. I've seen people try Priest to buff its health. I've seen Mage trying just to use the hero power to make the Patron work, but there's not nearly enough tools in any of the other classes as there is in Warrior. And if you want to look at that really quickly, some of the things that you'll notice in Warrior, of course, you have Whirlwind, 1 damage to all minions. You have Death's Bite, Death Rattle, 1 damage to all minions. And of course, the Warsong Commander. Whenever you summon a minion with 3 or less attack, give it charge. And that includes the patrons that spawn through the damage ability. These tools are what make Grim Patron so viable in Warrior. And again, other classes do not have the amount of tools that Warrior does. So this is almost unofficially a Warrior card. So because of that limited scope, that's why Grim Patron only receives honorable mention. Excellent card, very limited use. Moving on to the list itself, go with number 10. And that is another card that is good but has a limited use, and that is the Twilight Drake. Twilight Drake, 4 mana, 4/1, Battlecry. Gain +1 health for each card in your hand. And so you're wondering where this card fits in. Well, like Grim Patron being a almost Warrior card, this is almost a Warlock card, in that no other class consistently can really draw enough cards and apply the Twilight Drake as early as a Warlock. And that's, of course, due to the Warlock's hero power. Some trivia for you, earlier on in Hearthstone, this card used to be, I believe, a 1/1, and its battle cry was +1 attack and health for each card in your hand, making this Drake maybe like a 7/7, something like that, played on turn 4. Very, very strong card, a little too strong, so they brought it down. It is still a very strong card as it stands, though, and it's really only susceptible to an early silence. So again, like the Grim Patron, Twilight Drake, a very strong card, but very limited use. If you're going to be playing Handlock, Twilight Drake is a great card. In most other decks, probably not. Let's continue on with card number 9. Let's look at Violet Teacher. Violet Teacher, 4 mana, 3/5. Whenever you cast a spell, summon a 1/1 Violet Apprentice. So what good is this card? What is its use? Well, it's typically used in spell-heavy decks, most often in combo decks. So what kind of classes use card like Violet Teacher? Well, you might think Mage, but that's not really the case. Actually, I find that Rogues and Druids are probably the best classes to use Violet Teacher effectively. Why is that? Well, we'll take a look at some of the Rogue cards quickly that would use this relatively well. We have Cold Blood to give a bonus to one of those apprentices. 4 +4 attack is quite good for 1 mana. You also have Conceal. Of course, you can give them all stealth for a turn. May prove useful. And then, of course, there's Tinker's Sharp Sword Oil. Say that 5 times fast. Which, of course, buffs both your weapon and a random friendly minion. All very decent when you are pumping out 1/1 token creatures, so to speak, as you cast your spells. Likewise for the Druid, there are several good spells. Power of the Wild, giving your minions +1/+1. If you choose that, the 1/1 apprentice will summon first, being a 2/2 along with all the other buffs for the other minions. And of course, can we not forget, Savage Roar, give all your characters +2 attack for the turn. Obviously works very well when you've summoned a slew of apprentices. Alright, moving on to number 8 on our list, we have the Rubian Egg. Rubian Egg, 2 mana 0/2, summon a 4/4 Rubian as its death rattle. And so you're probably wondering, well, a 0/2, what good is that? Well, it's all about the death rattle here. Rubian Egg is commonly used in aggressive decks alongside, remember the pushers we talked about in the last episode? Your Abusive Sergeant, Dark Iron Dwarf, you can give the egg a temporary buff, use it to attack, kill it off, and summon a 4/4. Pretty good for only 2 mana. So I said that we'd talk a lot about synergy during this episode, and Rubian Egg is a card that synergizes well with many of the other cards you may put with this into, say, an aggressive deck. We'll talk about that as we get to those other cards. Just keep in mind what this card does and how it may synergize with the others. Another thing to note is that in many situations, Rubian Egg can also be considered an insurance card, so to speak. If you have a lot of small minions out, you're being very aggressive, and you're worried that your opponent may use an AoE, a Rubian Egg is a nice insurance policy that if they decide to go ahead and use that, you will still be left with a 4/4. So it's a bit of a sticky minion. You have to kill it twice. In many cases, you don't want to kill the egg off. But there we go. That's why Rubian Egg, such a strong card. Continuing the list, we'll go on to number 7. Another mostly aggressive type card, the Arcane Golem. Arcane Golem, 3 mana, 4/2, charge, battle cry, give your opponent a mana crystal. So, you see there's an obvious drawback. Giving your opponent mana, usually not a good thing. On the bright side though, it has charge, 4 attack for only 3 mana. So where does this work? Well, this works in 2 different types of decks. You'll see this commonly in aggressive decks, such as Face Hunter, maybe even Zoo. You'll also see it as a finisher for certain types of combo decks. I could imagine Rogue actually playing this, along with some Cold Bloods for some extra damage. And of course, Warlock has still a pretty strong combo using this and alongside, let's go look here, Power Overwhelming to give it +4/+4 until end of turn. And of course, you combo that alongside a Faceless Manipulator. You're looking at 16 damage for 10 mana. Not too shabby. That's why the Arcane Golem sits so high on our list at number 7. Coming in at number 6 is a bit of a tie. I would call these the tech cards. And of course, one of them actually has tech in its name, Mind Control Tech. 3 for a 3/3 battle cry. If your opponent has 4 or more minions, take control of one of them at random. And the other one is the Kazan Mystic. 4 mana, 4/3 battle cry, take control of a random enemy secret. Unlike the rest of the list, which I've talked about is all about synergy, cohesiveness, these are meta choices, both the Mystic and the Mind Control Tech, in that if you're facing a lot of certain types of decks, these cards will generally be more useful. If you're facing a lot of secrets, maybe from hunters or mages, Kazan Mystic allows you to steal some of their secrets and, of course, take them for yourself. Very powerful effect. Likewise, if you're facing a large amount of swarm type of aggressive decks, the Mind Control Tech can very easily be used to help swing the board in your favor. Again, these are choices that you're not going to use all the time. Sometimes they'll be horrible for the given situation, but if you notice a trend of either many secrets or an aggressive swarm of minions, both being popular deck types that you're facing on ladder, then Mind Control Tech or Kazan Mystic are very good options that you can put into your deck to help alleviate the problem. Coming in at number 5, we have another You would almost say this is a tech choice. It's not necessarily, but it works similarly to a mind control tech, and that is the wild Pyromancer. In the case of the mind control tech, of course, you're stealing one of their minions if they're playing a lot. In this case, if they're playing a lot of really small minions, you take them all down with wild Pyromancer and some spells. Like I said, it's not really a tech card in that you can't put it into every type of deck, like you could, say, a mind control tech or a Kazan Mystic. This is a far more focused deck. You're going to want it in a deck that plays a decent amount of spells. You might be able to use the spare parts that come off the certain mechs. You might use small, cheap spells for your class. In any case, Wild Pyromancer is used to bring down a bunch of small minions very quickly. You'll commonly find this card in Priest decks, alongside, say, Holy Nova, or even Shadow Word Pain, to help bring down, say, a medium-sized creature and a bunch of little minions. You might also find it alongside Paladins in the incredibly powerful Equality Pyromancer combo. Of course, would play the Pyromancer, and then Equality giving all minions health 1, and they all blow up. Pretty strong stuff. So that's why Wild Pyromancer takes the spot at number 5. Number 4 on this list is kind of the opposite to Wild Pyromancer. Instead of dealing damage to minions for spells, we're going to play minions and deal damage. That, of course, goes to the Knife Juggler. Number 4, the Knife Juggler. 2 mana, 3/2. After you summon a minion, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. So where does Knife Juggler fit in? Well, Knife Juggler is obviously used in aggressive Swarm-type decks. I would say that Knife Juggler is probably the MVP when it comes to aggressive decks. And that's just because you want to play him relatively early alongside a number of other minions. Knife Juggler is commonly used in aggressive Paladin, Shaman, and Warlock decks. Why is that? Well, synergy, as we talked about before. So in Paladin, we have Muster for Battle, summon 3 1/1 Silverhand Recruits, and equip a 1/4 weapon. So you have Juggler out, you summon 3 guys, 3 random damage. Similarly, the Paladin's hero power of summoning a 1/1 recruit will also spawn the Knife Juggler's damage. Shaman, the same way with his hero power and the totems, and you'll sometimes use it alongside such cards as Feral Spirit. There we are, Feral Spirit to summon 2 wolves. The taunts protect the Knife Juggler, and then, of course, the Knife Juggler deals damage when the Feral Spirit wolves come into play. Very good stuff. I would have to say, though, that the strongest combination probably has to be in Warlock, though, and that is with Implosion. 4 mana, deal 2 to 4 damage to a minion, summon a 1/1 imp for each damage dealt. If you already have a Knife Juggler in play, and then you deal between 2 and 4 damage, and then summon that many 1/1 imps, which then also juggle that many knives, there's a huge snowball effect. And again, that's one of those kind of cases that if things go your way, your opponent probably will not recover. So that is why Knife Juggler ranks so high, number 4 on our list. Moving on to number 3, another very solid card out of the classic set, we have Azure Drake. Azure Drake, 5 mana, 4/4, spell damage +1, battle cry, draw a card, and it is a dragon. So, where does this card fit in? Well, Azure Drake works well in spell-heavy decks that do a lot of damage with their spells, primarily Mage and Rogue. And what makes Azure Drake good? Well, it's obviously not its stats. 5 mana for a 4/4 is really nothing important. It's the rest of the card that makes Azure Drake what it is. Least of which is that it's a dragon. Blackrock Mountain introduced a number of cards that incentivize you for playing dragons or having them in your hand, and so there's that. But again, that's kind of the least. What's more important, of course, is spell damage +1 and battle cry, draw a card. Now, as far as spell damage is concerned, there's the Ogre Magi, 4 mana, 4/4 spell damage. And that's nice, but Azure Drake really makes it better. The 1 mana for drawing a card does a lot more than you may think. And I really can't overstate enough the importance of having card advantage in a card game. Now, I know that sounds a little redundant, I suppose, but a lot of times people don't think about this. Being able to cycle a card to replace itself as you play it is a very strong ability. In the event that you play this, you draw the card, next turn the opponent finds a way to remove it right away, you still at least have drawn the card, which is what makes Azure Drake so very strong. Alright, moving on to number 2. We have a card from the Naxx expansion. I'm sure you can figure out who it is. Sludge Belcher, 5 mana, 3/5 taunt. Death Rattle, summon a 1/2 slime with taunt. So, where is this card used? Well, it's commonly used in control decks, maybe even used in combo decks. It's a solid taunt that is is a sticky minion. We've talked about that in the last episode. Very hard to deal with. You have to kill it twice. And the fact that both of the incarnations have taunt make it very difficult for your opponent to get damage into your face. This makes the Sludge Belcher a very, very strong card. Something to consider when you look at Sludge Belcher, 3/5 taunt and a 1/2 with taunt. You would say, well, I've heard of those, right? Those are the Senjin Shieldmaster. Go find him. 3/5 taunt for 4. And the 1/2 taunt, which of course is the Goldshire Footman. So 1 mana, 1/2 taunt. So essentially Sludge Belcher is basically both of those cards combined into one. And once the first one dies, you get the smaller one. New players may say, well, why don't I just play those 2 cards instead of buying through into Naxx and getting the Sludge Belcher through that? And again, that's where you have to think about card advantage. Sludge Belcher in 1 card does what those 2 cards are doing. Does anyone really play Goldshire Footman? No. Senjin Shieldmaster, on the other hand, was a very popular card prior to Naxx. Sludge Belcher, in most cases, has pretty much replaced Good Tazdingo altogether. You may argue, of course, that Sludge Belcher is more susceptible to silence than even Senjin Shieldmaster, and that may be true, but then you get into the discussion of whether or not it's actually worth silencing Sludge Belcher. And in most cases, if you're not going for lethal that turn, perhaps silencing the Sludge Belcher may not be that important. Sludge Belcher sits right on that line where you may want to silence Polymorph Hex, do something like that to change it and get rid of its text entirely, but you're running the risk of an even stronger card being played maybe in a turn or 2 later that will make you regret that decision. So that's why Sludge Belcher, number 2 on our list of the top 10 rares in Hearthstone. Moving on to the number 1 card, another taunt, and that is Defender of Argus. Defender of Argus is kind of the epitome of synergy when it comes to cards. I feel that Defender of Argus is the number 1 neutral Hearthstone rare because of the flexibility the card provides. So what kind of decks can it be used in? Well, very many. It can be used in control decks, such as, say, Handlock, to put taunt on the large giants that you have played earlier. It can be used in aggressive decks as well to make small minions much more powerful. Remember we were talking about, let's go bring that up, the Rubian Egg, right? So Rubian Egg, if you can use a Defender of Argus to give it taunt, now they have to deal with the egg, and in return you'll get that 4/4 Nerubian. So there's where Defender of Argus really shines. It's the synergy, the flexibility, making Defender of Argus, I would say, the strongest neutral rare in Hearthstone. I think that just about does it for this episode, part 2 of the series, the top 10 cards of Hearthstone. Join me next time. We'll take a look at the top 10 neutral epics. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and take care, guys.